Right now in Australia, something surprisingly good is happening, and most people haven't caught on yet. Brand new cars are becoming seriously affordable again. We're talking under $20,000 to get on the road, SUVs for around $22,000 drive away, and even electric cars from just $23,990, prices that would have sounded impossible just a few years ago. And this isn't hype. The market is actually shifting. New brands are entering fast, competition is rising, and for buyers, that means more value for less money than we've seen in years. But here's the opportunity. Moments like this don't last. As demand grows, prices move, and the best deals quietly disappear. And hidden in this list are cars that are over-delivering right now, the kind people later wish they got in early. So if you want to stay ahead of where the market is going, hit subscribe now, because this is exactly the kind of shift we track here. And watch till the end, because one of these cars might be the smartest buy you'll see this year. Priced from around 31,990 Australian dollars, depending on the variant. And before you tune out, because that's still 30 grand Australian, just hear me out, because this car is quietly one of the most significant things to happen to affordable motoring in Australia in the last decade. Let me explain. When most people think cheap EV, they imagine something that looks like a toaster, drives like a golf cart, and has a range that makes you anxious every time you pass a petrol station. That was the reality of budget EVs for a long time. The MG4 is not that. This is a car that in higher trim levels pushes out around 150 to 215 kilowatts. It has a rear-wheel drive setup, which if you know anything about driving dynamics, you know is the sporty configuration. It handles well, it accelerates with genuine confidence, and it doesn't feel like a compromise. Now, MG as a brand has an interesting story in Australia. It's technically a British brand, but it's been owned by China's SAIC Motor since 2005, and since it re-entered the Australian market in 2016, it has been on an absolute tear. It's now firmly in Australia's top 10 brands by sales volume. That's remarkable for a brand most Australians had completely forgotten existed. But here's the thing about the MG4 that doesn't get talked about enough. At this price point, around 32,000 Australian dollars, you're not getting a toy. You're getting a car that competes directly with the Volkswagen Golf, the Hyundai i30, the Toyota Corolla, but with no fuel costs, a strong range depending on the spec, we're talking 350 to 530 kilometers WLTP, and a driving experience that regularly surprises people who are expecting much less. But here's where it starts to get complicated, because the MG4 sits at number 6 on this list, which means 5 more cars are cheaper than it. And one of those cheaper cars is also electric, but the story around that one is very different. Which raises a question I want to plant in your mind right now. At what point does cheap EV stop being a compromise and start being a legitimate choice? Number 5. The BYD Dolphin. And this one, I'll be honest, this one surprised me when it first landed in Australia. If you don't know the name, pay attention because you're going to be hearing it a lot more in the years ahead. BYD stands for Build Your Dream, which is either inspirational or a bit on the nose depending on how cynical you are. They're a Chinese company, they're one of the biggest EV manufacturers in the world, and they are absolutely gunning for the Australian market. The Dolphin comes in at around 29,990 Australian dollars, and that's significant because it sits just under that psychological $30,000 Australian threshold that a lot of buyers have in their heads. Now, the range on the base Dolphin is around 340 kilometers WLTP, and before you start doing the nervous mental math of can I get to Coffs Harbour and back, remember that the vast majority of Australian drivers travel less than 40 kilometers a day. Daily commuter reality is completely within the Dolphin's comfort zone. What makes the Dolphin interesting, aside from the price, is how normal it feels to drive. That sounds like faint praise, but it's actually the highest compliment I can give an EV at this price point. Because one of the biggest barriers to EV adoption in Australia has been the feeling that you're giving something up, that you're sacrificing familiarity for the sake of being virtuous. The Dolphin doesn't feel like a sacrifice, it feels like a car. A proper, well-equipped modern car with a funky interior, a smooth driving experience, and genuinely low running costs. Now, here's where I want to add a little nuance because I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't. The BYD Dolphin, like a lot of these Chinese EVs, is still navigating the issue of perception. Resale values for Chinese brand EVs in Australia are less predictable than for Japanese or Korean brands. The used EV market here is still developing, and when you're talking about a purchase in the 30,000 Australian dollar range, resale matters. But, and this is the interesting part, something happened in late 2025 that completely shifted the conversation around BYD in Australia, and it has to do with their other car on this list. Number 4. The BYD Atto 1, priced from 23,990 Australian dollars plus on-road costs. Let that sink in for a second. 23,990 Australian dollars for a brand new electric car in Australia in 2026. That's not supposed to be possible, and yet here we are. When the Atto 1 launched in late 2025, it set a record. It became the cheapest new electric vehicle ever sold in Australia, and not by a small margin. It undercut the previous entry-level EV options by a significant chunk, and it actually came in cheaper than originally expected. BYD's Australian pricing landed about $1,000 below even the internal forecasts. Now, to achieve that price, BYD made deliberate choices. The base model, called the Essential, runs a compact 30 kilowatt-hour battery with a WLTP range of 220 kilometers. The motor produces 65 kilowatts. It'll do 0 to 100 in about 11 seconds. It's not quick, it's not going to win drag races, it's not trying to. What it's trying to do is get people into electric vehicles who never thought they could afford one. And that's a completely different mission than every other car on this list. Here's the part that I find genuinely mind-bending about the Atto 1. Think about what 23,990 Australian dollars would have bought you in electric vehicle terms 5 years ago. Nothing, not a single new EV was anywhere near that price. The cheapest options were in the mid to high 40s of thousands of Australian dollars, and the idea of an EV that was price competitive with a petrol car seemed like something that was perpetually a few years away. The Atto 1 didn't just arrive, it arrived at a price point that is directly comparable to the MG3 petrol hatchback, a petrol car, and the EV now costs roughly the same upfront. Because when an electric car can be purchased for the same price as a petrol car, the petrol manufacturers have a problem. And that problem shows up clearly in the next 2 cars on this list, because numbers 3 and 2 are both petrol, and they're still selling like crazy, which tells you something very specific about where Australian buyers are right now. Number 3, the MG ZS Vibe, because it makes this the cheapest SUV you can buy new in Australia right now. Now, I've been in this industry long enough to remember when cheap SUV meant a raised hatchback with plastic clouding that tried very hard to look like it could go off-road and was fooling absolutely nobody. The MG ZS is not that. This is a proper small SUV. It's got SUV dimensions, SUV boot space, SUV seating height, the things that Australian families actually want. And it comes in at a drive-away price that is frankly staggering when you compare it to what the established players are charging. Power comes from a 1.5-liter petrol engine making 81 kilowatts and 140 newton meters. It's a CVT automatic. Look, it's not exciting, I'll be straight with you, but it's smooth, it's adequate for urban and suburban driving, and its fuel economy sits around 6 liters per 100 kilometers, which is acceptable. What you do get as standard is worth talking about, because the equipment level is one of the ZS's biggest selling points. We're talking about a large infotainment screen, active safety systems, a decent warranty, and MG has been extending their warranty coverage to compete with the Chinese brands that are offering 7 to 10-year arrangements. Here's the thing that I find quietly fascinating about the MG ZS. 5 years ago, MG was a brand that most Australian buyers viewed with a degree of skepticism. Chinese brand, unfamiliar, no established reputation locally. The kind of car a young buyer might consider, but that their parents would gently advise against. That sentiment has shifted significantly. Not entirely, there are still buyers who won't touch a Chinese brand, full stop, but the combination of competitive pricing, improving build quality, and critically, strong Australian warranty and service infrastructure has moved MG into genuine mainstream consideration. And MG isn't the only one doing this. The entire Chinese brand ecosystem in Australia is growing fast. But here's the uncomfortable question that nobody in the industry really wants to answer out loud. What does this do to resale values in 5 to 8 years? That's a story that's still being written. But there's one more petrol car on this list, and it's probably the one with the most interesting buyer story of all. Number 2, the MG3. And this one has a slightly complicated story. The current generation MG3 starts from around 20,990 Australian dollars drive away and base 5 spec, and it's one of Australia's best-selling small cars, full stop. Here's what's interesting. The MG3 isn't actually old. The current generation launched relatively recently and brought with it a significant upgrade in terms of interior quality, feature set, and overall refinement. It grew in size, it got a larger infotainment system, it got modern active safety equipment, it got the kind of standard specification that you previously would have found only on mid-spec variants of the established players. The powertrain is a 1.5-liter petrol engine paired with a CVT automatic. It makes 81 kilowatts and 142 newton meters. Again, not a sports car, not trying to be, but it does what a small car needs to do in Australian urban and suburban conditions without any drama. Now, I'd be dishonest if I didn't mention something. The MG3 had a recall. More than 10,000 examples were called back to address a seat mounting issue during safety testing. The driver's seat had shifted in a crash scenario in a way that raised concerns. MG addressed it, and the car still carries a 4-star ANCAP rating. But it's worth knowing. And this actually connects to something bigger that I think is really important to understand about the end of this market. When you're shopping for cars in the 20 to 25,000 Australian dollar range, the compromises are different from what you'd face at 35 or 45,000. Safety ratings, build quality, long-term reliability data, these things matter more at the budget end, not less, because these are often the cars being bought by younger drivers, by families on tight budgets, by people who can't afford a big repair bill in year 3. The advice I'd give any buyer looking at cars at this price point: do your homework. Check the ANCAP rating, look at capped price servicing, ask what the warranty actually covers and what it doesn't. But here's the thing. For a lot of buyers, the MG3's package at just under 21,000 Australian dollars drive away represents something remarkable. A genuinely complete, modern, well-equipped car for a price that hasn't been available in Australian new car market for years. And that makes it one of the most interesting success stories in Australian automotive retail right now. But it's not number 1. Number 1 on this list has been selling in Australia longer than most of the cars I've mentioned today. It's from a brand that has been making budget cars for decades, and it represents something very specific that no electric car, no Chinese brand, and no feature-heavy hatchback has managed to replace. Number 1, the Kia Picanto. Starting from 19,190 Australian dollars before on-road costs. And here's what's almost absurd about this car in 2026. It is the cheapest new car in Australia by a significant margin, and it has been for a long time. Now, the Picanto is tiny, genuinely tiny. It measures 3.6 meters. To give you a sense of scale, a standard parking bay is about 5.4 meters. The Picanto has room to spare. It's a city car in the truest sense of the phrase. The engine is a 1.2-liter 4-cylinder petrol producing 82 kilowatts and 122 newton meters. The base model is a manual gearbox. And before you say, who guys a manual in 2026, the manual is actually one of the virtues of the Picanto, because the auto adds another $1,600 to the price, and the manual's fuel economy of 5.4 liters per 100 kilometers means your running costs are about as low as you'll get in a petrol car. But here's what's actually surprising about the Picanto at this price. You get wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, a digital instrument cluster, leatherette interior accents, a comprehensive active safety suite including autonomous emergency braking, and a 7-year warranty on a sub-$20,000 car. I think about the buyer who ends up in a Kia Picanto, and it's not always who you'd expect. Yes, first-time buyers, yes, young people in cities, yes, retirees who need something easy to park and cheap to run. but also second-car households who've done the math and realized that their second vehicle does 15,000 kilometers a year of urban driving and doesn't need to be a $40,000 SUV. People who've looked at their monthly repayments on a financed Picanto versus everything else on the market and worked out the numbers in a very cold, logical way. The Picanto exists because there will always be a segment of buyers for whom the upfront cost is the primary variable, not the features, not the badge, not the perceived status, the price. And at $19,190, the Picanto wins that argument by default. Now, here's what I want you to think about for a second. In a list that includes a $23,990 electric car, a $22,990 SUV, and a $29,990 EV, the cheapest new car in Australia is still a 1.2-liter petrol hatchback from Korea. That tells you something about where the market actually is versus where the headlines say it's going. EVs are growing, Chinese brands are growing, budget SUVs are growing, but the Picanto, modest, simple, and completely undramatic, keeps selling. And honestly, that's kind of beautiful in a very Australian way.